Shalom, everyone, and we're starting Parasha Miketz. Today is December 15th, 2025, and thank you all for being here. I want to focus at least the beginning of this of the time together on a motif that is well known to all of us, and I wanted to at least spend some time thinking about it because by the end of last week, as I was finishing my Parsha sheet, I was, you know, enwrapped, quite literally, in the theme of what what is going on in the story as storytelling, and I made it abundantly, clear how I love this story, and it's very close to me, on so many levels personally, um, and and that it's a great story as a story, and that as a storytelling uh, example, it's a great example of storytelling and the storytelling art. Um, at one time in my life, I was very much into it. One second in it, and went to storytelling concerts, storytelling performances, storytelling, uh, classes, and I can tell a good story, um, and uh, one can. You can't get any better than this story, in my opinion. It's one of the greatest stories, certainly of the Bible, and certainly in our culture. So as an example of storytelling, I talked about the theme of how a story both reveals and conceals, and that the storyteller is the art of storytelling, as it is with anything, is to kind of disclose and to hold back. Um, and if you examine, I guess, every art form, you could make the comparison to music. You could make the comparison to poetry. You could make the comparison even to the plastic arts, to painting and sculpture. You can see in each one of those art forms what is essential is what the artist reveals and what the artist holds back. In music, music is also close to all of us. Uh, Music will kind of give you a little bit and then expand it and hold it back. I mean, if you listen to jazz or you listen to classical music or listen to any popular music for that matter, it will you'll get a bit of a theme or a bit of a motif, and you know that there's something coming, beyond that, and rather than give you everything at the beginning, it builds up to it, and it's going to hold it back. I'll give you a popular example of that, which is very familiar to all of us, which will be "Let It Be." "Let It Be" is a great song that culminates in da 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 da. No, it's "Hey Jude." I'm sorry. "Hey Jude," right? Sorry, "Hey Jude," right? So it da 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 da. So that's the theme that comes out of the beginning, and you can see he's really enjoying, these gorgeous chords, Paul McCartney, and then at the end it's all out there, right? So he doesn't go all out there at the beginning; he goes all out there at the end, because that's what art does. Art is the that revelation. Okay, and that back to you. You need to unmute.
Okay. So, hey, Rabbi. So, you're verbalizing storytelling. So, I saw Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And, to me, and you mentioned it last week, maybe 2 years ago, to me, the clothing, is really important. The fact that in the story, he changed the clothing from, the shepherd to the slave to the prisoner to the right-hand man of the of the Pharaoh. I mean, to me, I mean, even the title and the amazing Technicolor, people people know the dream come.
Yes, well, I couldn't have planned a better comment from you to segue
Thank you.
into the topic, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm just going to take a step back and say that clothing may not be overtly the the symbol of storytelling in the sense that you know it's not um, explicit in the text that this is what the clothing means. But I interpret from clothing is the thing that conceals and reveals at the same time. First of all, we all wear clothing. We all wear clothing for obvious purposes. But when we wear clothing, our clothing makes certain kinds of statements. And when we wear specific types of clothing, it's to make specific types of statements. And in different contexts, clothing both conceals and reveals. Okay, and that's just its function. Now, why I said that you are on the theme. This one of the themes that I wanted to talk about today is because we can track the various clothing changes in the story and really tell the story that way. And Andrew Lloyd Webber and whoever the production designers of almost every time that Joseph is produced anywhere, this is this is what they latch on to. For good reason. One good reason is because it's part of the story, and the second good reason is because it makes for good theater. I mean, after all, we come to the theater and we enjoy the spectacle of it. I mean, whenever I'm privileged to go to a musical, it's a real feast. It's such a joy to go because part of the experience is the music and the set, and especially if you're able to go to a Broadway, or frankly, I even love to go to amateur productions. Our production here, Place in the Park, is just excellent. But if you go to a school production, and I grew up doing camp productions, and so with camp productions, you have to be very improvisational, makeshift with your costuming, and and all of that is both fun, educational, and it's part of the art of it. You learn how to present yourself. And so the story is built on various costume changes. And the story is also built on the motif of clothing at central points. So it just so happens, Nanette, that I queued up all of the different sources for this, and we will see how the various the, uh, clothing changes function in the story. So back to the previous story, we have uh, the first story, which is Ketonet Pasim. Yisrael ahavet Yosef mikol banav. Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph from all of his sons, kivenz kunim hulo, because he was his son of old age, and I interpret that in various ways. Va'asalo ketonet pasim, and he gave him, or actually he made them, a coat of many colors. He made Joseph a coat of many colors, uh, and he and what is the ketonet pasim? The ketonet pasim is something only in this context here, and one other story, as I mentioned on the sheet, the story of Amnon and Tamar, which is in the book of Samuel, the rape of Tamar, the daughter of David, by her half brother Amnon. She wears a ketonet pasim. She wears a ketonet pasim, this coat of many colors, and as my colleague Martin Cohen points out in his commentary, very interesting commentary, so I have it here bookmarked. He says as follows: that the type of striped tunic called here ketonet pasim is specifically said elsewhere in Scripture, 2 Samuel 13:18, to have been the kind of striped robe worn later on by the virgin daughters of Israelite kings. Whoa, so that's interesting. It's a specific kind of clothing worn by the virgin daughters of Israelite kings. So here, what Martin Cohen, my colleague, is saying is that this is a women's clothing, and that Jacob is giving women's clothing to Joseph, and he's having Joseph wear women's clothing. That is a very astounding interpretation. And he says, yeah. So let's pause here and get Susie your comment.
Yeah, so isn't it possible that over the course of hundreds of years, because it was hundreds of years, that clothing changes its use and its customs?
So look, I want to concur with where the question is coming from, which is we're uncomfortable with this idea that Jacob gives him girls' clothing to wear, right? And it's just so discordant with our own reality, notwithstanding the fact that, the whole issue of gender is really quite important, issue in our time.
It's also a little absurd. That's why I'm saying, it could have changed by that, over the course of hundreds of
Right. So let's take it. I mean, I had planned to call Martin Cohen up and just have lunch with him at one point, and say 1 second, Steve. Okay, are you raising your hand, or you just?
Yes, I've got something to say.
All right, just a second. So the idea, it's not far fetched that a parent dresses a male child in female clothing. I know of these kinds of situations in the past, in the distant past, not talking about today and gender ideology, which I want to park on the side and not really deal with. But there are, I know of anecdotal experiences of people, I'm talking 60 years ago, where their mothers dressed sons in the clothing of girls. So what was that about? Beats me. Or maybe not. Maybe it's, we want to be cute, or maybe we actually, now, there is a kind of pent up desire to have this, right? Now, we can go in lots of different directions about this, and I agree with you, Susie. It's plausible that the meaning of this garment changes over the course of the centuries between the time of Joseph and the time of Samuel. But if you're the biblical writer, and if you're the biblical audience, you have to be hauled in and answer this question, which is, why is it that you're focusing on this? Or why is it that this is the only other time in the Bible? Or what are you trying to say with this? And so what is a plausible answer is, this is women's clothing, and that this is something unusual in the Joseph story. Or this is where I went with this. I went in the safe spot, which is, in both cases, Joseph and Tamar, violence and bloody violence happens. Joseph is, abducted, or thrown into a pit. The brothers strip his cotonet from him. They strip the tunic from him. They dip it in blood. It's all about violence. Okay. In the case of Tamar is raped. That she is a virgin. So we could make all sorts of associations with that. And she tears the garment herself in the very next scene, because she's been defiled in the worst way possible by her very own half-brother. Steve Parkoff, go ahead.
All right, I think I said this once before in the last week. Um, According to the archaeology writings, studies, especially when they dig up burials where the clothes are still extant, they found out that chieftains wore colorful clothing. So the colorful clothing is a representation that this is a chief of the tribe. The other thing is, um, uh, I just read one of the commentaries that Ketonet Pasim means long sleeves. I'm
Long
not sure
sleeves,
what
right,
that
right,
means.
right, right. Yeah,
I'm not sure what that means, but it's possible that everybody else had short sleeves in that weather there in the Mediterranean. I guess
right,
long sleeves indicates a chieftain.
right. And so, what all of that means is that, and I shared some of this at the Midrash in our study on Shabbos afternoon, is that it's not, when you see many interpretations coming up, especially from Midrash, it means that they really can't hone in on it. There's no one specific meaning. Go ahead, Marlene.
In last week's Parsha, or when we first meet Jacob before he gets his name changed, isn't he rather effeminate? He's
Jacob,
described. So isn't he passing that along?
are you referring to Jacob effeminate or Joseph effeminate?
Jacob.
In what way? I'm sorry.
Well, Jacob stays home and he studies in some yeshiva and he cooks, and his brother is this Bovan who goes out hunting.
Well, the answer is you could certainly go in that direction. That there are domesticated sides of him that line up with more feminine behaviors.
So
Notwithstanding,
maybe he was trying to pass some message on to his son and the others. They should see him that way. Maybe he was protecting him that way. He didn't go out after a while to shepherd his brothers or the sheep.
right. So there is this dynamic in Joseph and Jacob of movement inside and outside, and I think that kind of, you zeroing in here on one of the real dynamics here. Okay, all right. Bob, like shared with us in the chat, this article. It's probably one of many I've seen, certainly on queer theory and the story of Joseph. It's not an accident that Joseph, especially in the last 20 years, we've talked about this a little bit, is heralded, by many people in the LGBTQ community as, one of the archetypes of either gay or queer or something, and this is done at our peril, only in the sense that if we, in the sense of in Israel, when they satirize the story of Joseph on this very, very popular Israel satire program called HaYehudim Ba'im, the Jews are coming. Joseph is an extravagantly flamboyant gay character. And what they're doing there is they're picking up on the subtlety that's in the text, where it's assumed that Joseph is gay, and the reasons that are given are certainly caricatures. One of the reasons is because he likes clothing and he's made to be so focused on his appearance, certainly within the Midrash. The second reason, which is the more overt reason, is that it explains why Joseph does not want to sleep with Potiphar's wife. It's because he's a homosexual. And while that's a convenient explanation, one second, Annette, it's a convenient explanation. It doesn't. It's not a satisfactory explanation, as far as I'm concerned, literarily. The reason why it's not satisfactory is because the whole story is built on a sexual tension, And it's as Alanis Morissette, the great Canadian singer songwriter says, isn't it ironic? Isn't it ironic that here is this gorgeous boy and who is being trying to be groomed by the wife of his master, and it turns out that he doesn't want to sleep with her at all. And isn't it ironic? Is what she would say, and so that kind of collapses all of the sexual tension in the story. I'm not sure I would go in that direction on interpretation. Anyway, go ahead, Steve. Steve,
Well,
you're eating in front of us, and so we're all kind of distracted.
I'm sorry.
Don't eat on screen.
I'll turn my video off.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
It's 12:30 already. I mean,
Well, okay. Go ahead.
Two things. First, in the Torah, there's a shalshelet, the note that goes back and forth, indicating
yes.
Joseph went back and forth. Should I sleep with her? Shouldn't I sleep with her? She's nice, maybe until he decides and until he runs out. But that's one thing. Second thing is, I know a lot of men who love to dress, and they dress nicely, and they're not necessarily LGBT.
Necessarily.
No,
of course not.
My uncle was a dresser from the time of his bar mitzvah. I have a picture of him at his bar mitzvah with his tallis is wrapped around him like a shawl and tucked into his suit. So, and he went into the clothing business, and he was a clothing whore.
No question about it. I mean, again, we're in the realm of caricature and stereotype, and we could be forgiven for making those flaws. Go ahead, Nanette. You have to unmute.
I'm not shocked. Well, not because I'm just from New York, but I'm not shocked because I saw this incredible opera. I think it was called Akanan. Akanan. He was actually King Tut's father. He was the first sun god. So I think Joseph and the whole thing with him dressing feminine, whatever, I think was very Egyptian because this guy, Akanan, the father of King Tut, I mean, back in Egypt, they all dress like that. Very elaborate.
Right.
No?
It's a field of inquiry that I'm sure is fascinating, and it's not something I have any expertise in. Although I've dipped in just a pinky toe into this, and yeah, there are examples in Egyptian of queens that comport themselves as kings. That it goes the other way, at least from female to male. That I forget the name of the particular woman. She had been a queen. She had been the wife of a pharaoh. The pharaoh dies, and she becomes the pharaoh and dresses male to become the pharaoh. And that was in one of these great courses on Egyptology, and I forget which one. I'm in the middle of it at this point. All right, here, just back to what Bob showed us. So look at that. That's Joseph in the queer biblical, what does it say? Princess dress, right? And so this is an article on that, and we that's just, you'll see the reference to it. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, let's move on to the next incident. So the tearing of the Ketona Pasim, it happens when they strip him, they dip it in blood. I'm not going to quote the verses here. The second instance of garments is Vayikra Yaakov Simlotav Vayasem Sak B'matna Vayidabel Bano Yamim Rabim. Back in chapter 37, Jacob tore his garments. He places sackcloth over his loins, and he mourns over his son for many days. And so from that, that is one example of tearing in antiquity. To this day, we tear our clothing as part of the mourning ritual. And whenever, unfortunately, I have the experience of doing this with people as they stand over their grave or their deceased, I always cite, just by way of just helping people, what we're doing when we do this is we are connecting to the most ancient ritual, I think, in Judaism. I can't think of another ritual that extends, other than circumcision, itself. Uh, the rending of garments is probably the most one of the most ancient rituals that we have. And so here's Jacob, in a moment when he confronts the torn garment of his son. He tears his own garments as a response, a ritual response. Now I point this out not only because it's connecting clothing, but it's the storyteller here. What the storyteller is doing is giving you a picture, and that's what storytelling is. Storytelling is, I see a picture in my imagination, and I want to communicate it to my listener, so that the listener places the picture in their imagination. It's literally projecting, into your screen on their forehead, right? You see it. You see what I see, and I see the torn garment, and then the father in inconsolable grief, tearing his own garment. That is just uh, you know unbelievable. Okay,
Maybe it cost so much money that he really felt bad about it being ripped up.
do you know what I want to say? And that is such a it's I want to say this is an issue. It's an issue today in tearing, and I understand this issue. Believe me, you know when you stand and tear garments, the part of what people are reacting to is that the garments are expensive, right? I
It was the
remember.
gift of his old age. He treasured this boy, and he gave him a treasure and the memory of his beloved wife.
And so it is, and there, with every single symbol, there are multiple layers of meaning here, and I think that is certainly one of them, right? The connection to the preciousness, and of course royalty that Steve mentioned. I think part of it is beauty. Part of it is, the storyteller is kind of playing with us, because clothing is, it's like the gun in Chekhov's play. In the first scene, it's going to go off, and some critics really point to that as the idea here, that it's anachronistic to say that this is Chekhovian, okay? But what Chekhov is doing is simply great storytelling. Chekhov, puts the gun on the mantle in the first act of the play, and accuse the audience that something's going to happen with the gun, right? So the storyteller here is putting the clothing on Joseph in the first act of the play, and accuse the audience that by the second scene it's gone, and by further down, as we're going to see in a second, all of these costume changes are going to happen. Here we go. So we have this kind of segue to the other story of Judah and Tamar. I was asked this on Shabbos, and took me a couple of rounds before I got to the answer, as usual, because when people ask you a question and you're not prepared, what you have to do is start talking. You start talking, okay, and then as you talk, you think about it, okay. So I was asked, well, what's the purpose of this story of Judah and Tamar? And I said, well, it's what it does. It's, we can't just vote. It's like a subplot. It's a subplot, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, it occurs to me, well, the answer is we're developing the character of Judah. Why are we developing the character of Judah? Because Judah will appear in next week's Parsha as the individual who will make the supplication before Joseph. And Judah is the one that's been humiliated in the story of Tamar. The story of Judah and Tamar is as follows. Judah has a wife, a Canaanite wife. He has 3 sons with this wife. The wife dies. He has 3 sons with this wife. He marries off the first son, Er, to a woman named Tamar. Er is bad in the sight of God, and he meets his end. By the rule, according to the biblical Levirate rule, if a a man dies without leaving children, the next of kin, the brother, marries the wife in order to maintain the seed of the name, or the seed of the deceased brother. So it's the Levirate marriage is the next person, the next brother, next oldest brother, has the right and the obligation to cohabit with the deceased, the widow, basically. So his name is Onan. Onan understands that this child will not be his child. This child will be Er's child, the deceased brother. And so what he does is he enjoys having sex with Tamar, but that he does not consummate it with her, shall we say, and and therefore that is what is often interpreted as being evil in the sight of the Lord, and he is also put to his end by God. So there are two sons now that Judah has lost, Er and Onan. He has a third son, Shelah. And what does the father think? Shelah, if I give Shelah to Tamar, he's going to die as well, because this woman is bad. Okay, she kills men. All right. So, and Shelah happens to be young, and there's a good excuse. I'm holding him back from marrying him to Tamar, and secretly he says, I don't want to lose him, and so he forgets about her conveniently. She is owed this. What does she do? She disguises herself as a prostitute. She hangs out at the crossroads, a liminal space. She seduces Judah. Judah sleeps with her. What he does, he asks, what do you want as payment? She says, I want, I'll give you a goat from the herd, and he doesn't have it on him. And she says, he says, what can I give you as pledge for this payment? And she says, basically, give me your staff, give me your seal and your staff and your cord, which is basically, give me your social security number, your credit card, and your passport. Okay, these are your rod, your signet, and your cord are identifying marks for you. And she takes them, and he brings back the goat, and of course, he gives the goat to a messenger. The messenger is looking for prostitutes. There are no prostitutes there. And then finally she is discovered to be pregnant, and he is very angry that she's pregnant, because she must have become pregnant through prostitution. And he says, have her burned. And she says, whoever owns these is the father of the child. And she produces the signet, the rod, and the cord. And he realizes that she's right. Tzadka mimeni, ki al ken lo netatia l'Shelah v'ni. She is righteous because I did not give her to my son Shelah. And she has twins from this cohabitation with Judah, Peretz and Zerach, who go on to become important figures in the household of Judah. But in the most tragic moment, I think the punchline of that story, which is he no longer knows her. V'lo yasaf od lidata. He has no intimate relations with her. In other words, she is basically tied to him as a wife, but it's not a marriage. Okay, and I'll just say that's not nice. That's not nice. Okay. Anyway, clothing functions as that part of the story. Next, well, the most salacious part of the story is Potiphar and Potiphar's wife. And what happens is, as she tries to entice him to sleep with her, she grabs onto his garment. Shichvaimi, sleep with me. And here, this is where Steve mentioned the pazer. you know, vayima'en. Sorry, vayazov bigdo biyada vayanas vaytzei. It's not vayima'en here, but it's she grabs him by the clothes. She says, "Sleep with me." Vayazov bigdo biyada. He leaves his clothing with her. So the question is, Susie, you're making noise on the. You have a little static. I'm just going to mute there for a second. So he I can't mute you. How about that? There we go. So he does he leave the clothing with her because he had already taken his clothing off? When she grabbed the clothing, was he, well, was it because of his willingness to have sex with her? That's where there's plenty of ambiguity. That's where we can write the whole novel. Okay, when she saw, sorry, when he saw that he left his clothes in her hand, he went outside. Very, very confusing. He saw that he left his clothes with her. Which means he either said, "What am I doing?" and left, or he's, "What am I?" maybe it's different, okay? And then, of course, she's inside, she's holding his clothing, and she gets the immediate idea to frame him. She calls everybody and says to them, they brought us they brought us a Jewish kid, a Hebrew kid, to make sport with us. And he wanted to sleep with me, and I cried out. And when I heard when he heard that I was screaming, he left his clothing with me. Okay, so here's how you know it's a frame. Nobody would do that. Nobody would run out with naked, but evidently he does. Okay, so and she again talks about the clothing. We'll go to the next clothing instance, which is in our Parasha. But Susie, you have raised your hand, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, he's not naked. I've been told that Egyptians had some kind of undergarment and an outer cloak, and it's the outer cloak that she grabs. So when he runs out, he's scantily dressed, but he's not naked.
Right. Or he has those linen underwear that the priests wind up wearing.
Whatever.
Oh, yeah, fine. But, so if, nobody's going to walk out naked, but are they going to walk out in their underwear? Okay. That's not, I don't know. Okay.
I mean, I don't know how much this undergarment covered, but there was an outer cloak and something else.
Okay. All right. Here we go. Sorry. Let's go back to the text, and now we're now in our parsha. So when Pharaoh has the dreams in the beginning of the parsha, the wine steward comes and says, when we were incarcerated, there was this Hebrew kid with us, and he interpreted our dreams, and he interpreted them successfully. And I love the way the text does this. It just kind of knocks out the wine steward. The Pharaoh doesn't really care at all what he has to say. And it goes directly to the next scene, which is that they get Joseph. Vaishlach Paro vayikra Joseph. Pharaoh sends for Joseph. Vayiritzuhu minabor. They got him out of prison. Vayigalach. They shaved him down. Vayichalef simlotav. And they changed his clothes. Now, that's, again, the signal to the audience is he's standing before Pharaoh. He's going to be wearing, a more respectable garb. I just want to, I know this is going to upset people because I'm going to mention a political and current thing, but there was this moment, a year ago, when Zelensky came to the Oval Office. It was, a setup, in my opinion, to humiliate him. And, Zelensky for the last 3 years during the war has been wearing basically fatigues, and he did this consciously because his country's at war, and he's reflecting that he's at war, and he stood before the United Nations, and everywhere he's given public speeches, he is wearing basically an army uniform. Well, he came to the Oval Office like this, wearing that, and they the comment was made, look how you're dressed. Look how like that kind of thing. And so he took it seriously. And so the next time that he came, he had a Ukrainian designer design him a special suit to wear, a suit that would look like a suit, but also kind of hint that it was different and that would be presentable and stylish and also respectful of the office, okay? And so it was a costume change, okay? And look back at the pictures, and you can identify what I'm talking about here. For 3 years he was wearing one set of clothes, and for the last several months he's been wearing a different set of clothes because he is being put before authority. The same thing is happening here with Joseph. Joseph is wearing prison garb, and he has to come before Pharaoh. So in prison, you don't wash, and you are placed, on display. I would say, lahavdil again, but these are examples of clothing. Look, we've gone through these terrible experiences watching them from afar. But when the hostages came out, many of the hostages, especially early on, when they were emaciated, the Elisha Rabbi, of course, story is the most emblematic of this because, of course, he was quite, a healthy-looking individual, in pictures before October the 7th. And when he came out, he was literally emaciated. He was, everyone said he looked like a survivor from the camps. And he was emaciated. He was starved. And in the memoir, which I encourage everyone to read, he talks about being starved and starvation as their tool. But what was he wearing? And that's a really good question. So they were wearing certain clothes when they came out on October 7th, but all of those clothes were torn and damaged and bloodied and everything. They couldn't wear them. So in Gaza, they gave them kind of, Gaza clothes. Who knows? These are all the things that you find in the third world. All the discarded brands. What you find in countries of poor countries is all the things that get returned to the Gap and these places, that they can't sell them. They end up in the third world and they're sold for pennies, by the manufacturers, and people wear crazy looking clothing in these countries because they're cheap, and so that's what they were wearing in Gaza. And then, of course, when these hostages were released, they created from the ugliest, these stupid uniforms for them, as part of the show, the masquerade of the hostages, this humiliation. So you see, again, how clothing functions as a motif, in all these different settings, in all these different cultures. Okay, next. Pharaoh removes his ring, gives it to Joseph, dresses him in linen. Vayasar paro et tabato me'al yado, vayiten ota al yad Yosef, vayalbesh oto bigdei shesh, vayasem revid al zahav al tzavaro. He gives him linen and puts a gold band around his neck. Okay? Then, when the brothers come down in this Parsha, and they see that Benjamin has been framed, what do? Vaikru simulotav, they tear their garments, back to the tearing as mourning. And then, when Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers, he gives all the brothers a set of clothes. It's like, I went to Seville Row and bought you a suit, but to Benjamin, he gave you 5 suits. That's amazing. That's amazing. All right, he gave him 5 changes of clothes. And then the last scene that I could find here with clothing has to do with the death of Jacob and the mummification of Jacob. When Jacob dies, chapter 50, Vayipol Yosef al Pnei Aviv, he falls on his father's face, Vayef, he cries, and Vayitzav Yosef, he has his servants instructed lachnot et aviv, to mummify him, vayichantu arofim et Yisrael, and they mummified him. And back to Egyptology, and if you have never done this, this is really a great experience. But if you want to spend, I don't know, 3 hours of your life in a very interesting setting, go to the Metropolitan Museum and go to the Egyptian wing of the Metropolitan Museum, and you will see the mummification process. You will see how ancient Egyptian, kings, nobility, and maybe even ordinary people were mummified. They were wrapped, basically bandages, but a linen kind of wrap, and these things exist today, and they've been excavated from the tombs, and the I don't know if they actually have actual mummies there.
Yes, they do here
They
at
do.
Rutgers in the museum on the old Queens campus. You can go to the Science Museum. They have a real mummy.
A real mummy. Okay, so just from a motif perspective, the motif is the clothing, and what we've done here is we've gone on this little journey of clothing as showing, and intuitively, as I said at the beginning, the theater captures this idea, or I don't want to say exploits this idea, but really expresses this idea that when you change the clothing, you change the costume, you're changing the story, and that the story is being told through all these ways, and that's why it's a highly evocative story, because the visual senses, it appeals to our visual and theatrical sense. It's a question, in my opinion, to what extent the story was a pageant story. That is to say, were there the equivalents of, the portrayal of these stories in antiquity? I leave that as a question. I would say, to what extent was the story presented? To what extent was the story sung? To what extent was the story told as orally? Now, my gut feeling on this is that there is all of this information that is conveyed in text was probably part of a musical tradition in ancient Israel. If we are to take our place among all ancient cultures and civilizations, we would find ourselves adjacent to every single culture in antiquity that shared its national story through song. And so it's not that I have no doubt, but it's that I think it is highly likely that this and other, of course, other, and there's specific references in the Torah to things that were set to song, like the Song of the Sea, and like the Song of the Well, and the other songs in the Torah, but that there had to be a song that this was a national song, okay, and that's the way it would be remembered. Number one. Number two is, I think, with lesser degree of certainty, that there is a pageant element to this, a theatrical element to this. I can't state it with certainty because, we don't know anything about a theatrical tradition in ancient Israel. We certainly know about it in ancient Greece. We certainly know that that's part of ancient Greek culture. But it stands to reason that performance and story performance would have equally been part of ancient Israelite culture as it was in other ancient cultures. Number three little point is the story of Esther, which I think from the moment the last piece of letter ink went dry, someone said this is going to make a good play. The story of Esther had to be performed. I mean, the the story of Esther is such a pageant of ribald irony and humor and tragedy and seriousness that it is not something that it is only reserved for text and for telling, but it had to be. I mean, had to be. I mean, it stands to reason, plausibly, that it would be presented, because that's how the life comes out of these stories. Certainly, in rabbinic tradition and rabbinic culture, the story of Esther becomes almost the archetypal text for public recitation of text. And from the recitation of the text of the Megillah, we get a lot of the laws and customs around public reading of documents in the tradition. So that's what I would say. It has all the marks of song and pageant and theater, and therefore it should not surprise us, even at the risk of projecting theater back to antiquity, that costume is significant. I would say at the very, very, minimum, costume is significant in telling the story, and the story is through the motif of clothing, which is revealing and concealing at the same time. Susie, go ahead.
So, as you just mentioned, Greece had theater, but ancient Egypt is a lot earlier than that. And I mean, I'm not an Egyptologist, so I don't know anything. If we know anything about was there a theater in ancient Egypt? But just as an aside, something I noticed. I mean, I've seen the word before, but it just occurred to me. So it's the rofim that vayachantu oto. So you've spoken before about how Egypt is a death culture, and the only place that I think in this whole, I mean, certainly in this whole story that doctors appear is for embalming.
Is a rofé in this text here a doctor or an undertaker? And that would be my question on that
Yeah, that's
word.
good point.
Yeah. Look, I want to make him also mention, which is, again, I can't speak to, what theater may have been performance in antiquity. I am guessing on all of this, and I would say that performance, I mean, from the minute you're a child, you perform. It's like, Marlene, your hand is up next, but I'll point to you only in that you have direct experience of this every week. When the kids come on the bima, part of that is natural. I mean, I see, why is it that a child gravitates to the stage? And maybe I'll turn to Stanley also here. And it has to do with infantile or child, I don't want to use, maybe it's the only word that I'm coming to, which is
Egocentric.
a child needs to present.
Is ego.
And that's called narcissism. But Stanley, can you talk to the stage of development in childhood that makes the child uninhibited in standing before people and presenting? What's that? What is that? Is that a Piaget stage? Is that a?
I really don't know much about that.
Oh, okay.
Interesting question, but I'm not sure. It's true that children very often do want to do that. They also do the opposite. They get very shy and move away from it.
Sure.
But in terms of, in terms of the narcissism, that word, it has like a negative sound.
Sure.
But in fact, it's very important as a positive thing because it has to do with a child's or adult self-esteem and the way they feel about themselves. If it gets excessive, we all know people like this, then it's a problem.
So maybe what I'm saying is that a child is less inhibited that is not all children, but many children are uninhibited in presenting themselves because they certainly don't know, any other context to do that. And they will be very, very happy to do that. Marlene, go ahead.
We didn't talk about Rebecca changing her clothes and having time to pretty up.
So good example. And I was only focused on everything from Joseph on, but you could dial back a few stories, dial back to Jacob and Esav, the costuming there, dial back to Rebecca, who places a scarf around her when she sees Isaac, and you could dial back to Adam and Eve.
Yeah, fig leaves.
The first instance of clothing as a way of revealing and concealing, or in this case, concealing. Right? But then if you just do the first story, so Adam and Eve, they put on these leaves, but God is the one that gives them kotnot or gives them, and there you have the word kutonet in there, and it's not kutonet pasim, but it's a kutonet or, which is a leather garment, which I have to say, this is one of those puzzles for me at least, many of us, how is it that God is making them a leather garment? I mean, leather implies killing, whatever, so lots of ways you can kind of sneak out of that one. Okay.
It's just a sign that it's an allegory.
It's an allegory, or what, I think, I mean, most of us interpret it as this is God presenting to Adam and Eve a symbol of love, and clothing and covering in antiquity as today is really a symbol of love. We have the wedding ceremony, so we often state that the badekin is about checking, from bedika, badekin. Okay. So I've heard many rabbis, and I do not use this in when I officiate at weddings, because many rabbis will say, just like because Jacob was fooled on his wedding night, we want to make sure that you know who you're marrying, so that's why you put the veil on, which makes absolutely no sense from both a ritual or any perspective. Because first of all, if you want to check, you're going to lift the veil, not put the veil on. Second is, come on, it's a ridiculous kind of illusion. What a more sensitive interpretation is adornment, and it is the husband to be adorning the wife to be, yes, in placing a veil, which obviously has its deep anthropological significance, but it's say I adorn you, I cover you, I show respect to you. I'm not hiding from you. I'm not trying to make you invisible. I'm trying to give you hidur, that is to say, the awe and the grace of reverence and respect through establishing this garment on you. Okay, Bob.
Thank you. While you were speaking, I was on the web looking for some links that fully support and amplify everything that you've said today. One of them is from the costume designer from Wicked that talks about how to tell stories with clothes.
There you go.
Another one is from a fashion photographer who I heard at a disabilities conference a year ago, who has a gallery and a website called Positive Exposure, where he takes pictures of children with their families. Many have birth defects, genetic conditions, and talks about how clothes empower
put those
people
in the,
build
I
their
see them in the
self-esteem.
meeting chat here.
That's right. Plus another article about dramatic theology, as Hashem is author, actor, director, along with all of us. What I wanted to, they're really, really interesting and consistent with what you're saying. What I wanted to say, though, is also the following, which is along with revealing and concealing, I often wonder about the role of the onion peel in storytelling and how peeling the onion becomes important. And one of my favorite things I recently heard, I don't know if it's based on Midrash, is with the word pasim, that
Yes.
each of the letters can also be seen as symbolizing the trials that Joseph was going to have with
Well, if you were
Potiphar,
at
right?
the
With the business people, with Ishmaelites and the Midianites.
if you
So
attended
there's your deep.
the sister at dinner the other night, you would have heard a great little speech about that. I spoke about that exact comment. That's the Rashi on that. We also, it was part of the Midrash. It's Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 68, number 3. I did that this past Shabbat, and again, the idea, the technique that it's called the interpretive technique of pasim, using every letter as a word. It's called notarikon, which is abbreviation basically. Pe Samech Yud Mem Potiphar Socharim, Marlene Socharim Yishmaelim Midyanim. Okay, all the different tribulations, and what where we could go deeply with that is to say, isn't that interesting? The way that a garment reflects, the challenges that we have in life. That the garment is in some way an insignia of what is inside us. I make reference to the fact that prior to modernity, when people really only had one or two garments, and they suffered, a loss, you actually saw the tear in their garment, and they mended the tear so that they could still wear their clothing. And that says that you walk around in public showing, who you've lost. It's almost, when you think about the irony of this, a general walks around with all their ribbons, right? They don't walk around with the medals, but they have a certain type of, and this is true universally. They wear the ribbons on their chest, and you could see by the layers and the rows how many awards and battles, etc., they've been in, and a person who can decode that, another military person or someone who's versed in what is the ribbon with the blue stripe, what is the ribbon with the yellow green yellow stripe, and these are different campaigns of that soldiers have gone through. So what you're doing is you're comporting yourself publicly with your travels and your challenges. I would say that the penchant today for button wearing, that is to say, little pins that we all wear. So it's become more and more popular over the last several years since AIDS. I think maybe AIDS was the first
Bracelets.
one. Bracelets. AIDS there was the red ribbon, and was it the red ribbon or whatever the ribbon was? Every disease has a ribbon. Yellow, of course, during the hostages. Yellow for yellow ribbon. And so what it's saying is we comport ourselves with our national or with our personal, challenge, an insignia of honor. In the case of, if you are a member of a distinguished order, like the Order of Canada, by law, the Order of Canada recipients have to wear their pin when they are in public. It's a special, beautiful pin. And you'll see whenever Lorne Michaels or Michael J. Fox or others who have the Order of Canada appear, they are always wearing the pin on their lapel. Okay.
And I suspect you won't go here without a glass of wine.
Yes, okay.
But if you were going to be tearing the ribbon, which is the klipot,
Yes.
what are you releasing that's hidden?
Yeah, okay, I
terms of the
agree with
mystical
you.
side of
It's
things.
it's a portion of you. Tova, you wanted to say something.
I just want to say that I was always fascinated about other people having all these tattoos. And when I ask people directly, like, what does it mean? It's their whole life is there. Their happy moments. They have a tattoo for that. The death of their friends, their parents, everything. It's like we just talked about memory on the outside. That's what some of the people do with their tattoos.
I think
Because I couldn't understand anybody doing it.
So tattoos, this is something that in Jewish culture is very controversial because the Torah explicitly prohibits tattooing. But of course, tattooing is extremely popular. I don't know what the percentages are, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 1 out of 2 people now have it, and what that means. And what I've always kind of felt about tattoos is that there is a certain way that tattoos are trying to present. They're trying to convey. They're communicating exactly what you're saying here. It's for some people, it's cheapening, right? Trivial. They see they're able to do something trivial, but for some it's quite deep, and they're explicating and expose. They're being they're exhibitioning to
Their
the
whole
public
life.
their whole life to the public. Now,
God.
now I find
Right.
myself in this just like you, Tova. So I want to say not you have. I don't have the chutzpah to go up to someone, although I doubt you do this unless you're talking to someone that you might be familiar with. Sometimes there are people you're on the subway or on whatever, and you see people with lots of skriblach. They have all the skriblach on them, and I want to go up to them and say, "What? Like what are you trying to say? You can't do that." On the other hand, the tattoo is an invitation, or is it an invitation? See, this is but the tattoo establishes a new boundary of privacy. It says, "I want to present to you what I am, but God forbid you should ask me, because it's offensive if you ask me." So what you need to do is you need to say, "Gee, I don't even know what you need to do." I mean, if you're a stranger and you see
Okay,
someone,
Rabbi, listen. I just ask. I
of
look at
course
them.
you
I
could get
say,
away with it. I can't get
can
away with
I
it.
just say, you know what I say? This is very interesting. What is it? And they
Right.
will tell me the entire conception. My mother died 6 years ago,
Sure.
and I wasn't around, and I'm so sad about it. And this is her grave or
Yeah.
something.
I
That's
can't
what
get
she
away with it.
means to me. And every time I look at it, I found it very touching.
No, of course. And
Now,
I can't.
I would never do that, but I
Right. So I probably can't get away with it. I can't, because I'm too judge. I comport myself. My affect would be, and my tone of voice would be too judgmental, and I have to work on that. So I, because I would come up and say, "What is that?" Like, "What did you put on your arm? What? You had such a beautiful arm. You had such a beautiful. So you're such a beautiful. Why do you have to go?" Scribble on it. That's how
can't say that.
I
You
can't
can't
say that,
say
and
that.
there's no way that I could even pretend to go, "Oh, it's so interesting," So no. But what I've come to realize, is that people, are genuinely trying to communicate with their bodies, and do so with this means. Now, I have my thoughts about it, and I feel that there's an infantile aspect to it, because I in my own mind I link up my grandchild and every child that I've ever seen who has a pack of crayons or pack of felt markers, and the first thing that they do with the markers is they write on their bodies, right? There's beautiful little children's books about, it's the Robert Munch book about the crayons, the indelible
Arrow, the
crayon.
purple crayon.
Right, the purple crayon, like, and it's an instinctive thing, and it's instinctive in all cultures, which means it's deeply rooted in our humanity, which means how we present ourselves is a fundamental question. Now, Jews make the following compromise, which is, okay, so you're not allowed to tattoo yourself, but why? Nothing's stopping you from putting on some clothing. Put on
Yeah, like
prescriptive
a
clothing.
strimel.
Or like a strima. I often explain to fill-in this way. Okay, listen to me. Here's the theology. Okay, what's more important than God? Okay, you should bind. You should have God on you. Okay, what would you do more than write the name of God on you, to brand you with God? What tattooing is, a branding. Okay, and so when I brand you, it says I belong. Shouldn't you brand God's name on your flesh? That's what the Torah is saying. But we don't do that because it contradicts the principle of, the body and the body as a vessel of God and all the things that are tied to it, including what I think is going on in the Bible, which is that it's pagan. The Bible associates tattooing with pagan practice and so veers away from it by saying don't do it. So what does it do? What's the compromise? Put tefillin on and take it off. And if you wear a temporary tattoo, nothing wrong with that, right? If anyone who's put on tefillin in the morning sees that when the minute you take it off, there are marks. No,
And your hair too.
in your hair, whatever. Now, is that deliberate? I don't know, but it's what I know is that for the 45 minutes that I have my tefillin on my arm and on my head, I am making a statement that says, you know what, you're wearing the Torah, and you Jewish man, you Jewish person, because men and women can wear tefillin, in my opinion, you have the name of God on your body, and for this time during the day, that's what it's about, and that's awesome. That is awesome. I just don't have it permanently on my body. And that's the where we part from actually modern culture, in which this phenomenon is so common. It's fascinating. Okay, we've gone over as usual. Thank you very much.